Welcome to this week's edition of the People Progressing podcast. And today I have a therapist on who I think is really going to change the way you look at things and the way you think about things. And I'm really excited to have Allison Bratsch on. And Allison, the way I start this usually is just have you introduce yourself, where you grew up, what you like to do as a kid, sports or music, anything that you did as a kid that kind of had some influence on to what you're doing now. So if you can kind of start with that, and then we'll kind of go from there. I'm really excited to have you on.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and I appreciate the opportunity. It's good to connect with you again. Yeah, so like Joe said, I'm Allison Bratsch and I am a mental health professional by education and trade. And I'm sure we'll get more into the professional side of things later.
Yeah.
So, anywho, I grew up in rural Minnesota, and that's actually where I'm currently living, back in my hometown. That's been an interesting shift after being in Denver for almost 14 years. So yeah, I grew up in a pretty small community, lots of lakes. So I think I'm kind of a walking stereotype when it comes to, you think about the people um, who are from Minnesota. I
Yeah.
have Scandinavian heritage and German. Grew up going to a Lutheran church, all that sort of stuff. So for me, a huge part of my childhood was sports. I think that was a big part of my identity and upbringing. And I suppose it was having a father who was a collegiate athlete. Both my parents are fairly athletic, and they just exposed us to lots of different activities and sports when we were kids, my brother and me, and I just loved being active and playing sports. I did spend quite a bit of time just playing outside, climbing trees, building tree forts, going fishing, and all of those like outdoor types of activities. My birthday is actually in the middle of winter. So in the winter, it was ice skating, cross country skiing,
Yeah. Yeah.
playing in the snow, forcing ourselves to get outside so we didn't feel so stir crazy. Yeah, I think, like I said, sports was huge for me. And as I got into high school, I got involved in some other extracurricular stuff, but it was mainly sports.
Now, I read something that you said that from an early age in your childhood, you could tap in to how people felt or people's
Mhm.
emotions. Where do you think that came from? Was that just something that was kind of a God-given thing? And I think that's huge, especially in leadership, but I think it's huge in terms of your world as well. But what do you think helped you develop that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been of the philosophy that it's never just nature or just nurture. I think that there's always both at play. And for me, I really believe that there are some inherent traits in terms of my levels of sensitivity and empathy, just being really in tune with emotions. And I think that I was just really privileged and fortunate to be raised in a very loving and supportive family. And so I was taught from a young age that emotions are okay and that feelings are okay. Um, Socially, I had a little bit different experience and maybe was picked on a little bit for being sensitive. I grew up in a neighborhood of mostly older boys. There were two other girls in my neighborhood, and all three of us were, I would say, what you would consider tomboys. So, yeah, I mean, I was small, and I think that I kind of adapted to just be a bit of a fighter. But also just be very aware of other people's emotions. So again, I think that a lot of it is just inherent, but it was made to be okay. And I think that I like to say that my mom was sort of my first life coach because she really instilled in me. Oh, both my parents did, but my mom in particular, just the importance of kindness, and how to be a good friend and how to listen to other people, as well as just attitude. Um, someone very close to me in my life currently likes to use the phrase, assume positive intent. And so I think from a really
Oh,
young age,
wow.
I think I also like I didn't have a name for that, but I just kind of looked at everyone and just assumed like, hey, we're all doing the best we can. And I was just always so interested in people and like learning about people and helping people. Again, I think it goes back to just my sensitive nature.
Well, I think that's really fascinating because I'm the same way. And when you're talking,
Mhm.
it sounds like it'd be that if someone asked me the question, I probably would have answered almost the exact same way.
Mm,
But I think where I got my so-called emotional intelligence, my feel for others and how they're feeling, is watching my dad coach.
mm,
Because when your dad is coaching and your dad is your hero and your dad has to make decisions like we all know that leaders do, and some of those decisions are good for people and some of that same decision is bad for people.
mhm,
And I always watched how it affected somebody in the wrong way. So for example, when he hung up the lineup for his team who was going to play, I always watched the kids who weren't on the starting lineup and how they reacted. And if they were mad at my dad, it hurt me because I'm like, I'm watching it and I sometimes hear some of the things they said or whatever. And it just made me really aware of people's feelings and how they felt by watching how they reacted to things that my dad did. So I think
yeah,
that's kind of where I got it from. But
mm,
I think it's interesting you use this word. I think it's the strongest word, and I think it's the word that we need to use more in our world. Empathy.
mm.
How important is empathy in your world?
Well, I mean, for me, it's everything. Not just in terms of being a therapist, um, being a mother, being in tune with my children, but also, I didn't mention this earlier, but I run a group mental health practice based in Colorado, and um, supporting my staff has become kind of my new passion, and I need to make sure that I'm at least working toward being in tune with them and understanding their experience. I think when you are in, obviously again for me as a therapist, but I think when you're in any sort of a leadership position or role, um, empathy is everything. And your
And,
ability to connect. There is this, I think one of the biggest parts of empathy is can you connect with others and really just remove. Now you're always going to look at other people in the world through your own lens, through your own experiences, right? But really trying to remove what your own stuff and truly see someone.
yeah. And when you're talking about leading your practice, your businesses here, in leading with empathy, how important is it for your staff to have empathy back for you?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that. um I mean, I suppose there is a two-way street there, and I suppose it's extremely important. But in order for my staff to even have the opportunity to develop empathy for me, I have to be willing to show up very authentically and be vulnerable. Um, I think one of the strongest traits of a leader is just being able to say, "Hey, I'm not perfect, or I may have made a mistake. Um, I'm working on it," that sort of thing. Just be able to model being human and putting it out there that you don't know everything,
I,
and you do struggle sometimes.
I agree with you 100%. And you've touched on two of my top things of being a leader: empathy and vulnerability. And
Mm,
the third one for me is listening and being present with your people, which I think goes along with the first two.
mhm.
How much have you evolved in terms of your listening skills as a leader and running your practices from being a therapist first, then transitioning into the leadership role?
Well, it's definitely been uh, a different experience with listening, because typically when I'm listening, it's it's when maybe I'm hearing something that maybe isn't so pleasant for me to hear, whether it's something is not working well within the practice, or someone's unhappy, someone's struggling. And it's really hard for me to not internalize that, right? Because all I want to do is run a successful business and where everyone is happy and everyone is
Yeah.
thriving.
Yeah.
I want my people to be doing well and enjoying their jobs. And I mean, I guess it's an ongoing struggle for me to accept that I can't make everyone happy, but I really, really want to try, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, that listening, and truly hearing without putting my own defenses up is huge. The other piece I would say that, where there's a subtle difference is I've come to accept that, not all of my staff will be 100% honest with me, or come to me. A lot of times I think because they care about me as a person and they don't want to upset me, even though I ask for that feedback, right? And so that information is going to, another admin staff, and and then they are in kind of a tricky position where they want to, I mean, obviously they're going to respect the confidentiality and, I guess, experience of that staff member, and so they're not just going to run and tell me everything. So there's an element to the listening that's like just picking up on things, even when they're unspoken. If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, the nonverbal.
Yeah,
I've had some people on my podcast who talked. I've had a nonverbal expert on my podcast, and
that's fascinating.
some of the figures that they've said about when you're having a conversation, how much is actually verbal and how much is nonverbal would blow your mind, because
Hmm.
majority of it is nonverbal.
Yeah, what do they say? It's like 75%
Yeah,
or something.
it's 70. I think she said 82,
Wow.
something
Yeah.
like that. So it's really a skill that I think a lot of leaders need to work on,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
listening skill. And
Hmm.
I say it this way because a lot of leaders, and you're in this position, especially being an ex-athlete and coach, and your dad was a coach and all that stuff. When we listen to people, instead of listening all the way through, what we try to do is solve and coach. So
Hmm.
as you're telling me something that's bothering you or something that you're struggling with or whatever, I start solving and coaching in my mind right then instead of listening all the way through to hear you all the way through. Because usually, if you listen all the way through, ask some good questions, a lot of times that person can coach themselves through it. Now they
Hmm.
have ownership in it. But us as leaders, what we like to do, because we like people, we like helping people, is we're already looking to solve and coach before
Hmm.
they get done truly speaking to us.
Hmm.
And I think you said something earlier too that was fabulous. I think it's brilliant. Listening without putting my own defenses up.
Hmm.
Wow. That's a huge thing right there, Allison, because I think a lot of people do that as well, especially leaders, because leaders have so many things coming at them, and then all of a sudden somebody comes with I don't know if I want to use the word complaint or whatever it might be, but we get very territorial. And we want to, you know, be a cat in the corner, put our back up and come at you sometimes, instead of just listening all the way through again and not putting our defenses aside. Let this person speak, see what they say, and be present with them and get out of our defense mode. Because I think a lot of leaders do that as well. They get into defense mode really fast. What a profound thing you just said, listening without putting my own defenses up. I'm gonna use that. So I'm stealing that from you.
It's not
What's
easy to do.
It's not. And part of that has to do with the vulnerability, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes we have to take that. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror first. And I think that's
Hmm.
what great leaders do.
Hmm.
What's the biggest struggle you've had in terms of transitioning from being a therapist into now the owner leader?
Oh, wow. I don't think I can name just one. um, well, I think on a practical side, it's been just learning how to run a business. I mean, I didn't go to business school. I went to school to be a therapist. So it's been a steep learning curve. Um, yeah, I do think, back to what I said earlier about accepting that I can't make everyone happy.
Okay.
Um, and accepting, you know what, like this practice model, business model, however I'm choosing to run things, that it might not be for everyone. And, I've had to really work on accepting that that's okay. Um,
That's
yeah,
hard.
I think there's an element of, I, as a therapist, my perspective is I am not the expert, right? And I do think I have a little bit of a coach in me as well, like you were talking about, and wanting to find solutions and help people and coach people. But I think at my core, I mean, I just want to empower people. And I believe that
Mm,
everyone has their own answers and solutions inside of them. Like you said, people will eventually just coach themselves if you ask the right questions and you reflect to them, right? So I think there's an element to me, like as a practice owner or business owner, as a leader, where I have to remind myself that I can't do things for people. I can't fix or solve things for people. It was somehow easier for me to do that as a therapist. But now when the livelihood of all of these people is in my hands to a certain degree,
mhm.
I feel a great sense of responsibility there. And so I want to, jump in and help and problem solve. Um, and that can be really counterproductive for people, right? And I think could take people's power away. And so it's really, trusting my staff and just putting it in their hands, whatever it is that's within their role.
Was that something that was hard for you to do? Trusting them and putting it in their hands?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because again, I think we all would wear a cape to some degree, right? Like we want to
Yeah,
save
yeah.
and we want to help people and we want to do things for people. And I do think, just to be completely honest, that for me, there is an element of perfectionism. I think in some ways it's perfectionism, in other ways it might just be like this pursuit of excellence. But um, I can be very particular and I want to do things how I want to do them and I want them done the quote right way. So just accepting like there isn't one right way to do things. Hey, if we all have a shared or common goal, there's a lot of different ways we can work towards that goal. Um, so just kind of letting go of whatever, whatever my preferences are. And yeah, delegating, putting that trust in people and just having faith that whatever outcome is sort of meant to be, that's what will be.
Wow. That's a huge transition. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
tough thing for leaders to do. I have a couple more questions, and I want to get more into your work, like
Mm-hmm.
how you're helping people and stuff. But culture, running your practices, what culture do you want? What culture do you have? How have you built it? And then the last question is this: how do you guys live it every day?
Mm, they're excellent questions. I mean, culture is everything. We say, when I have admin meetings with my admin team, we're humans first, and you have to treat one another like human beings, that are imperfect, that struggle, that really at the end of the day are doing the best that they can. And so back to this idea of assuming positive intent. Um, so we really try to approach one another from a very loving, compassionate, empathic, supportive place. I would say in addition to that, we love to collaborate. I think collaboration is huge, which is kind of an interesting concept when you think about applying that to the mental health world, because you think, well, okay, here's just, the therapist sitting with their client. And obviously there's a lot of, strict rules and regulations around confidentiality. But at the end of the day, when you're a therapist and you're doing this work, this really, really challenging work of working with people's lives and their deepest darkest secrets and their biggest struggles and insecurities and trauma and all of this, it's a really difficult job. From the standpoint of it's a lot to hold and you can't do it alone.
Right.
um, I've thought of this in terms of like the analogy to me is when you raise a child, it takes a village. And I think like to be an effective therapist, that, you know, to have a sustainable career, it takes a village. You need a lot of support around you. And so we really do try to collaborate as much as possible. I think in terms of how this plays out on a day-to-day basis, it's through just a lot of communication. I'm checking in with my practice manager, with my clinical director, with my intake coordinators, my billing folks, and, you know, here and there as I can individually with therapists to say like, hey, how are we doing? You know, how are people feeling? How's this person, like, you know, where are we in terms of, you know, our goals? So it's a lot of just checking in on, again, our people. I had another thought. It escaped me.
I think that's wonderful. I think one of the biggest challenges we have as leaders, running a business, running a sports team, whatever it might be, is to create the culture that we think we want, to and then to live that culture every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a saying that when you protect your culture protects you.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you're going through some tough times, the culture is what's going to pull you through that. So
Absolutely.
a therapist is having a hard time because they're dealing with somebody's issues that are really affecting them in a stressful way. Well, the culture you just described of collaborative, helping each other, talking with each other, supporting each other, that culture is playing every day in your organization. That's going to pull that person through those tough times as a therapist, working with that person they're working with that's really affecting them. And I think because of your sports background, I think you understand that really well. And I think it's really important to you that your staff is doing that and helping each other, supporting each other, empathizing with each other, like you said, to help each other through all these difficult times, or when there is a difficult time. And that culture is something that's really important to you. You described that perfectly. And I just want to touch on one thing. I know I keep saying this, but you keep saying some really inspiring, profound things. You said, I just want to empower them. Everyone has the ability to find the answers themselves. Man, is that powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to the listening, but that goes back to your culture as well. I think empowering people is huge in what you're doing for your people and your organization. By empowering them on a daily basis is only helping you guys grow and being able to serve more people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it starts with the work we do with clients and then absolutely empowering one another. You know, no two of us are alike when it comes to the work we do as therapists. And um, so we provide a lot of clinical supervision for early career therapists. And I know that all of us share the perspective that, you know, it's not, as a supervisor, it's not about, you know, telling your supervisees how to work with their clients or, you know, what techniques to use, or, you know, we might provide some suggestions if people are feeling stuck, but it's so much more reflective. And it's about, well, what feels right to you? What are you experiencing? What do you think? And putting it back on the therapist so that they can develop those skills and really find, you know, who they are and find their strengths as a therapist.
Another great thing of a leader is finding people's strengths and putting them in their strength.
Oh, that's what I was going to bring up earlier, was just that when you lead people, you have to also, I believe, be willing to set aside your personal agenda or even your business plan, you know, whatever it is that you want to happen, and actually ask your staff, well, what are your goals?
Yeah.
And how do you
Yeah.
see, you know, working for this organization, supporting your individual, professional, and personal goals? You know,
Yeah.
how do you want to develop?
I agree with you. I don't know how you can lead and coach people if you don't know what those people want to be led and coached in,
Right.
and what their goals and aspirations are. I always ask people all the time, where do you want to be 3, 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I be a positive piece of that journey? How can I be somebody that you can look to and know that I'm there for you? somebody that it's had a good you've had a good experience with, somebody that I know you've taken something from me and made your life better. And that's what you're doing with your people. I have to ask you this question because you were a therapist and doing therapy. You know, you and I talked about this off air last time when we first met. I have to ask you this question. What gave you the confidence in yourself to take that risk and move from a therapist to the role of the owner of a practice, to build a practice where you're now leading people and doing all those things when you, like you said, you didn't have a business degree. You didn't really understand some of that stuff, but you still had it within you to take that risk. What do you think that is?
Well, I think first and foremost, it wasn't really my plan. And so I don't think there was any sort of desperation or like, oh, it has to look a certain way, or I literally knew nothing when I started the practice. I just knew that I wanted to have a bigger impact and that I wanted to support other therapists, and I wanted to start mentoring and supporting early career therapists. So I took on an intern. I would say the second part is I have found out, I mean, I don't know that I fully knew this about myself, but through this journey of starting and running a business, I have discovered that I actually really like change. I've always known that I like challenge and I like learning new things. But I think the most important thing is that for whatever reason, I am very comfortable with risk.
Okay.
I've had to develop the muscle of asking for help and support, and accepting that I can't do everything on my own. And I think that is the number one reason why the growth for us happened so rapidly. So we are almost 4 years in to the group practice, and we have approximately 35 providers right now. We will likely be fairly close to 50 by the end of the year is what we're projecting. So that's pretty rapid growth.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I think what the number one reason that happened is because I was really lucky to bring in some amazing people into the practice, therapists and administrative staff. And we're all focused on our mission, and we are all on the same page about what we're here to do. And we work together to make that happen. There is absolutely no way that I could have done any of this on my own. I have relied on the support of many incredible people. So I think with going back to the risk piece, I'm comfortable with risk for whatever reason, internally, but also because I know I'm not alone. There's a privilege piece to this for sure that I think needs to be named. That I grew up in a very supportive family. Now I grew up, in a pretty modest financial situation. So it's not like I, had a lot of financial resources, but I had the support and the belief of family and friends, and people encouraging me and saying like, this is amazing. You got this. Like, I got your back.
Pretty amazing. I look at it when you talk about your growth. I think what you're great at, listening to you, is you're great at building teams. You're great at running teams. I mean, when you're talking about 35 therapists, that's a team. Your culture, you talked about collaborative, family, those things, the teamwork that involved with your culture, that not afraid to ask for help. That's all part of being a part of a team. And I think you're brilliant at running teams and starting teams and building teams and making sure everyone does feel empowered and everyone feels like, I bet I could go to 35 therapists in your practice and say, do you like coming to work? And they would say, yes, I get to come to work. I don't have to come to work.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to blow your own horn because you're on this podcast, but you amaze me with how fast this growth is, and it's all based on helping people. It's all based on serving people who need help. And let's transition to that. Mental illness. What does that look like in our country? What does it look like in your eyes? And what inside of you is so powerful in helping people with it?
Mm. Oh, those are a lot of big questions. Well, thank you. First of all, I mean, I appreciate the kind words. And I bet you could guess what position I played in basketball.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet you were the point guard.
Yeah. Yeah. For most of my basketball
There
career.
you go.
Oh gosh, where to start? There is absolutely an epidemic happening in our country, particularly with children and teens. And I'm not saying anything that anyone isn't aware of, but our youth are really, really struggling. And I think that there are many factors at play. I think it's not an easy world for kids to navigate. It's very different. It's a very different climate and culture than a society than when I was a kid. And I don't know what the easy answers are to any of it, but the shift that I have seen over the last decade in the mental health field, and I think, for me, this is part of my broader vision, is reducing stigma, and making it acceptable to ask for help. Back to what I was talking about earlier with, hey, we're all humans. Um, I there's a disorder in the DSM, which is, the manual that all of the mental health disorders exist. That's where all the, definitions are and categories and criteria and all of that. And so adjustment disorder is in there. And it really is about, hey, having a response to a stressful or difficult life event.
Right.
And so I like to joke that, well, we all have adjustment disorder to some
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
Disorder is a strong word. That's just the clinical language. But, I just don't think any of us are meant to go through life alone. I'm a big Brene Brown fan,
Me too.
not just with vulnerability, but with connection.
Yeah.
And how much she talks about the importance of just that vulnerability and connection with others. We need other people. We are social beings, and it's not always helpful to get help from a family member or a friend. So when you have a trained therapist who can hold that space for you, listen to you with a non-judgmental ear, and empower you, again, back to the empowerment, to seek those answers within you, and even just to help you, give you permission sort of to start that journey of healing, whatever that looks like. I mean, that is so powerful. I think that being a therapist is such a privilege, to be a part of someone's life in such an intimate way, and to get to see what we see. Now, we don't always see all of the progress. A lot of the work that we do, I would say, is planting seeds. But there are times when we get to see tremendous healing and growth and progress. And it is incredible to be a witness to that, and to know that you are a part of that, at least in terms of, like, you provided that safe place and that safe relationship for that person to begin to heal.
Right.
That is some powerful stuff.
Yeah. And that, I have to ask this question. Little, I don't know if it's role play, but you have a person who's listening to this podcast, and they're thinking, man, I really think I need some therapy. I'm struggling with this. I'm feeling like I'm depressed, blah, 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 blah. But they say, if I go to a therapist, that just means I'm weak. Doesn't mean I can't handle things and all that kind of stuff. What would you say to that person?
Mm. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of narratives there that would need to be unpacked.
Yeah.
But I think my first response would be, all right, up to this point, going through life, without going to therapy or without asking for professional support, I wouldn't even say help, I'd say support. How is that working for you? Where are you at? What's the harm in trying it? And um within that work, I think that there is an element of unpacking the, well, emotion, having emotions is weak or asking for help is weak, that messaging isn't really helpful. We know that. But yeah, I guess I would say, how is that working for you?
And I guess I look at it like you break an arm, you go to a doctor. I blew out my knee year ago, March. I blew out my knee, tore my ACL, meniscus, and some other stuff. I went to a doctor. I didn't let it just heal on its own, because
Mm-hmm.
it needed help. What's any different between that and mental health?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, it's a
Because
great point.
I know there's a lot of people out there who listen to this that I would like for them to understand that going to get therapy and to going to get the support like you talk about isn't any different than going into the doctor when you have a cold.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, and you might look at it differently than I do, but I just look at it. There's so many people out there, like you said, you see so many people, the problems that are out there now. I just wonder how many more people are out there that need more help, more therapy, that could
Mm-hmm.
really make a difference in their lives, that are just afraid to do it.
Yeah.
They don't take that leap of faith to do this and say, you know what? It's just like if I have a cold, I went to a doctor and they gave me some medicine. It's not any different than that.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do, your work for people, um, you say something. I think this is really interesting. I'm going to read it. It says, "I understand the impact of high stress and the challenges individuals face as high achievers. I offer a direct yet compassionate approach that considers every aspect of a person." When you're talking about working with high achievers, what do you see a lot that they struggle with that brings them down?
Mm. It's never enough, you know. Whatever that drive is, wherever that comes from, it's like nothing is ever enough. And whether you call that, whether it's related to self-worth, whether it's related to, maybe it's a trauma response to something, um, maybe there's an element of perfectionism. But what I have seen for high achievers is that there is a very strong um, inner critic.
Right.
It's it's both serving them and driving them to be better and to achieve more, and it's creating pain, and that can manifest in a lot of different ways. um, but it's sort of this, like, devil on one shoulder and angel on the other shoulder, and it's
Yeah.
really hard for people to let go of that inner critic, because, like I said, it has served them so well. I think you could say the same for anxiety. Not all anxiety is bad. Sometimes anxiety helps us to avoid a life-threatening situation, or maybe it actually motivates us. Maybe you can think about that in school. If you have a little bit of test anxiety, well, hey, maybe that motivates you to study more, something like that. So that's one of the big things I see with high achievers is, um, yeah, there's an inner critic there that is very strong.
So,
Uh, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, you got me thinking here, because you said that sometimes that has served them well, so they hang on to it.
Mm-hmm.
Then, as a therapist, do you work on them to knock the critic off their shoulder and get them out of there?
Mm,
Or if you think
it's more about shifting the relationship with it,
okay,
to hopefully remove the aspects of it that are causing pain. How can this be a positive thing in your life?
very interesting. I read something, and maybe you I'm sure you know more about it than I do, but that we have like, I heard one thing as much as 80,000 thoughts a day. Then another study I read said they kind of combined some of those thoughts and brought it down to 7 to 8,000 thoughts a day. But whatever it was like 80 to 90% of those thoughts that we have a day are negative
Mhm.
stories that we're telling ourselves that aren't real, that are bringing us down. Have you dealt with anything like that, or you guys deal with stuff like that before?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that that's
The
so
little
much
man.
of what we do. I like to call it the negative committee in
Oh,
your
there you
head.
go. There you go. I like that.
Sometimes it can feel that way. You've got all these negative thoughts happening, and I think for us as humans, it is a bit of a survival mechanism.
Right.
So I also think we can get really addicted to those thoughts because that's what feels normal, and a lot of times, unfortunately, that's like what fuels us in some way. Um, but in our modern world, like we just don't need to be preoccupied and worried about the things that we do. We don't need to have the same internal response anymore because we're not in a hunter-gatherer society where our life depends on, oh, when am I going to like eat my next meal, kind of a thing. Now there are people in the world, yes, where that is the case. But for many of us, it's not. But we still have these internal experiences of all these negative thoughts that again are coming from a survival place. Our brains are just doing it.
Okay. Okay.
I love the idea of I can't remember where I heard this or read this, but something about don't believe all of the thoughts that you have in your head. Even you
Right.
just said that, they might not all be true.
So what is your suggestion to help people with that? To get those, I don't know if I want to say get those negative thoughts out of your head, or how to deal with them better, or I don't even know how to term that question, but what are some strategies that you can help people with to combat it, combat
Mhm.
that negative you inside of you?
Yeah, good question. I think it really has to start with identifying those
Okay.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, even take a step back, becoming aware. Becoming aware of this happening, becoming aware of this pattern, um, because it starts the moment you wake up in the morning. Like, oh, I have to do this. Oh, crap, I slept in. Like, oh, I should have gotten up earlier. Oh, now I've got to get the kids to school. Whatever it is. Um, yeah, so becoming aware that it's happening. And it takes a lot of conscious effort and a lot of reflection. And that's where therapy can really be helpful, is to just kind of dissect all of those conscious processes. However, I do think a lot of our thoughts come from um, stuff that's happening way below the surface, deep in our subconscious. And then I think the next thing, like I said, is identifying and then really picking apart some of those thoughts and how is this helping you or serving you. Again, unfortunately, I think that a lot of the negative thought patterns that exist for many of us, they might not be healthy, but they're functional. Like they're functioning in some way for us, keeping us stuck in patterns that are familiar and that feel safe. Human beings, our brains do not like change. We want
Yeah.
homeostasis. We want comfort. We want familiarity. We want predictability. We don't want to change. It's really challenging and takes time to change some of those thought patterns that have been present for a long time. Um, so I think that there are ways to address those thoughts from a cognitive behavioral standpoint. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty of
Yeah.
therapy, and there are a lot of alternative approaches to addressing those thoughts. Something that we started doing within the last year in our practice is ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Now, I'm not trained in it, I'm not practicing it, but I do have a handful of licensed providers who are now trained and practicing. And people have said, so the dosing sessions, we do 3-hour dosing sessions, and most clients will do, at least 2 or 3 dosing sessions. what I've heard people say is it's like 5 years of therapy in 3 hours. Now, I'm not saying like go do drugs, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think what I'm putting out there is that you don't have to sit in therapy for 10 years, you know. There are many different approaches and options, treatment options now if you're really stuck. And so it doesn't have to mean going to therapy every week, week after week. Um, and for some people that's the best route, but there are a lot of options.
Interesting. I heard a lady say one time, when you're having those negative thoughts, count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Count
Mm,
from 5 backwards, and it just closes off your thought. And I've
mm,
tried it, and it does work. I'm like 5,
mhm.
4, 3, 2, 1. Now all of a sudden I'm not thinking that anymore. But I think of what you said first was you have to be aware of it. A lot
Yeah,
of us aren't even aware of it.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think distraction can be a really healthy and helpful thing sometimes. I use
yeah,
distraction with my toddlers all the time.
yeah.
And sometimes we need to distract ourselves. I would just caution people to not use distraction to the point that you're avoiding, because if it's a
Right,
repetitive
right,
thought and this is a pattern, yeah, it's maybe something that, needs to be evaluated
right.
on a deeper level.
Really powerful stuff. I have one more thing that you said. Okay. And I'll be straight out honest. I'm reading this from your LinkedIn page. It says, when you're pulled in multiple directions and your cup is empty, you suffer. Your life, what you offer the world, is too important not to prioritize your mental health and wellness. How hard is it for people to understand that they all have something to offer the world?
Mm, how hard is it? I don't know.
A
Yeah, I
lot
don't
of
know.
people don't see themselves as a person that can offer something to the world. And I believe what you just said, what you offer the world is too important. You're saying that about everybody. You're not just saying that about a select few of people. You're
Yeah.
saying that about everyone has something special to offer the world.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We all learn in what elementary school about random acts of kindness. Um, we all have that capacity in us
Yeah,
to even just show up in the world and
right.
show kindness, and that has a ripple effect. So yes, 100% agree. Everyone has something to offer the world. Everyone has their own unique strengths and gifts. No two people are alike. I'm not saying anything earth shattering here, but we all have an opportunity to improve whatever it is, our society, our culture, our world, our environment. Um, but if we are trying to approach the world from an empty cup, we're not going to be effective.
Wholly 100% agree. And Allison, we're almost at an hour. I don't know if you've realized that we've gone that fast. I
Flying
think
by.
you and I could talk a long time. I
Mhm.
have 3 questions. I wrote a book called The Three Ps: Finding Your Purpose, Perspective, and Passion. So I ask every guest on my show those 3 questions. What is your purpose in life?
Serve others. I think it's to help, to serve.
You brought that out in this podcast from the very beginning. One of the
Hmm.
first things you said was, I love helping people.
Hmm.
And that's one of the very first things you said on here. I
Hmm.
skip over perspective. I go to passion. Tell you why in a second. But what is your passion in life?
My passion, health and wellness, all around, like true, whole person wellness.
And I like to say that most of the time your purpose equals your passion and your passion equals your purpose. And you kind of just prove that. But what holds it together when the noise comes flying at you, and like you said, the bad situations happen to all of us. when the noise comes at us and everything else and tries to take us out of our purpose and passion, what is your perspective that holds that together?
I could see this getting very spiritual, but I think what initially comes to mind is the power of connection. And I really think that that is one of the reasons I became a therapist because, and I said this earlier, I really just enjoy connecting with other people. It's one of my top values is connection. And I think that there is so much power in human to human connection.
Yeah. Man, what a great hour. You're an amazing person. Beautiful inside and out in what you do for people. We didn't even get to the fact that you're a mother of two beautiful girls and an awesome mother and all that stuff. And you've balanced running this practice and building it to 35 up to 50 counselors and therapists and so forth while having two young girls and doing all that stuff. You're just an amazing person, and it's all fueled by that service attitude. Your heart to help and serve others is what carries you, and that's why you built this thing up to 30 to 50 therapists, and it's going to keep growing and building, and the amount of work that you're doing for people is just extraordinary. And I want to thank you for all your work and all your therapists for all their work and how they're helping people and so forth. I say every day, all I want to do is try to be a blessing in other people's lives. And you said something earlier that really made me click. It's having that opportunity to be a blessing in people's lives and realizing that everyone does have that opportunity, even if it's saying hi to somebody in the grocery store line. You're a blessing in someone's life by doing that. And every day we have the opportunity to do that, and you do that tenfold every day with how many people you guys help and so forth. So how can people get a hold of you if they want to call you, come to the clinic or talk to you or whatever? What's the best way for people to get involved?
I think the easiest way would just be to go to our website, crscounseling.com.
Okay.
Easiest way. Did I tell you the last time we spoke, one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou? People will never remember. They won't remember what you say or what you do. They will remember how you made them feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just had to like piggyback on what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do that every day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on. You inspired people today. And that's what the People Progressing podcast is all about, is to inspire people to get out there and try new things, get better at things that they do and realize their potential and go for it. And that's what you did today. So I really appreciate you helping me on my journey with this. And thank you all for listening to the People Progressing podcast today. Please share it with your friends and subscribe and do all that stuff. I'm not even sure what all that means, but I just want to grow this and make people, help people and so forth. You can get a hold of me through Coach Joe White 97 at gmail.com. And I'd love to come speak to your groups or anything like that. And let's just keep making the world a better place. And please, please, please keep progressing. Thank you so much and have a great week.